All right, everybody. We got to hit the ground running with this first one. So, thank you all again for coming. It's just wonderful to see so many familiar and unfamiliar faces. Is the sound okay? Is everybody hearing me all right? Okay. So my name is Dr. Christin McIntyre, and I'm a psychiatrist. That means I'm an MD. I'm a medical doctor. I went to medical school. And I chose to specialize in psychiatry, which means I was trained, among other things, in diagnosing psychiatric conditions and prescribing medication for those. I also chose to pursue training in therapy, so talk therapy. So that means that I can do both. I can prescribe medicine and I can also do counseling with my patients. And increasingly over the years, I've concentrated more and more, I guess, on Christian and Catholic patients. And so I've been learning more and more about faith-based approaches to mental health and healing, including what I'm going to be talking about tonight, which is Thomistic psychology. So that refers to psychology rooted in the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas. And what's going on with her? Help.
I was just seeing, okay, I see it might work now.
Whoops. Okay, we already went over that. So, say this is St. Thomas Aquinas. He lived in the 1200s, and he wrote in incredible detail about how God designed us as a body-soul composite. And he described what he called the faculties of the human person, which is mostly what we would think of today as psychology. And even though what he wrote is 800 years old at this point, it is incredibly useful. It holds up incredibly well in the face of modern developments in neuroscience, imaging, because it's true. It's the objective truth, and the objective truth does not change. So what was true 800 years ago is still true today. And so that's great, but unfortunately, what St. Thomas wrote is pretty difficult for us modernly to understand because we are no longer trained in philosophy. Some people are. Some lucky students grow up learning a little bit of it. I was not one of those. And so it was extremely difficult. It's taken me 7 or 8 years to get to the point with this material where I can try to simplify it and explain it to other people. So that's what I'm trying to do tonight, because as I've understood it, I have felt compelled to share it with other people because it is so profound. There's just over and over again, it gives you these aha moments like, oh, that explains everything. It's amazing. So I'd like to try to share some of this with you tonight. Again, it's like a fire hose though. So I've come up with a diagram. I find it easiest to explain these things visually. So here we go. I've got 2 overlapping circles, and these represent the material body and the immaterial soul. Because as Catholics we believe, again, St. Thomas tells us that we are created as a body-soul composite. And it's truly a composite. It is not the ghost in the machine. That our body and soul are intimately connected and function together. But I arranged them this way, one above the other, for a reason. And that is because there's an order, there's a hierarchy to everything. Our God is a God of order. There's even an order within the Trinity: Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, or Holy Spirit. The Father is not the greatest person of the Trinity, but he's the first. There's an order to it. Therefore, Jesus came to do the will of the Father, not the other way around. There's order inherent in everything. That, again, God is a God of order. So, for us, made in his image, in our body-soul composite, there's an order, and this is very important. Our highest faculties are the intellect and the will. And these are located, if you will, within our immaterial soul. The operation of these faculties does not depend on the function of our material body. And so if you think about this, this helps us understand why all human life is sacred. Because if you have an immortal soul, it doesn't matter if you have one cell or a complete body or a disabled body, you reflect the image and likeness of God in your intellect and will. God is intellect and will. He's spirit. So we reflect God's image simply by virtue of the fact that we come into existence with an immortal soul. Doesn't matter what the rest of us looks like. Of course, the rest of the world doesn't know or understand this, right? So those are our highest faculties. Everything else is going to be located in this overlap. So, meaning that there's both material and immaterial components. So these things are rooted in our flesh, but animated by our soul. And here too, there's going to be a top-down hierarchy. There's some order, not shown perfectly in my diagram, but you kind of get the point. So I'm going to start quickly with the easy stuff. The mostly material parts of us, muscles, bones, digestion, things like that. That's the body stuff. It's animated by the soul, but there's really not an immaterial, a bunch of immaterial stuff going on. Then we come to the external senses. Okay, we all know what these are. Eyes, ears, nose, etc. These are our external senses that take in data from the outside world. Now, St. Thomas tells us that there is an additional sense faculty called the common sense power. And this isn't common sense like we use the term today. What it means is it takes all the external sense data and makes it into one thing. So the example that I always use is a banana. This is the external sense data that goes along with a banana, right? It's yellow, smooth, inside's white and kind of squishy. It has a characteristic smell and a characteristic taste. It doesn't make any noise, or it shouldn't. And so that's our external senses, have all this information. Our common sense power makes it into a banana. So now there's an image. It grasps as one thing that which our external senses have sensed. So now this image of this banana shows up on what Father Ripperger calls the TV screen of our imagination. This is a super important faculty. We'll be talking more about it. It also links to the memory. So your memory stores all the images that you've been exposed to. And so Father Ripperger says that our imagination is like a giant TV screen that the rest of us is always watching. And one of the reasons this is so important is because the image that's on that TV screen is what triggers our emotions, okay? So, I'm sorry this is complicated. I'll try my best to make it simple. St. Thomas says that emotions come from the movement of our sensitive appetites. So sensitive appetites are kind of what they sound like. An appetite, you have a desire for something. So our sensitive appetites are basically what we love, or the opposite of that, what we hate. But love, let's stick with love for now. If I love someone and that person walks into the room, I am moved by their presence, right? If I'm hungry and there's food in front of me, I'm gonna literally move toward that food. So there is motion in emotion. The sensitive appetites are said to move when they encounter their object, the thing they want. And that movement is emotion. So again, the TV screen of the imagination is what directly triggers that movement. That's what the sensitive appetites are reacting to. So arrows up and down there. I'll leave it there for right now. So now, one last thing in the lower faculties to talk about, and this one is super important. This is called the cogitative power, and that's a big word. It's kind of fun to say. It makes you sound smart. Just let it roll off your tongue. The cogitative power does for all the lower faculties what the common sense power did for the external senses. So I like to talk about the cogitative power being a project manager for all the lower sense data. So it's not just the yellow and the smooth texture and the taste of a banana. It's all of your memories about a banana. It's all of your past experiences of a banana. It's the way that your mom would pack a banana in your lunch when you were a kid, and for a week afterwards it would make your lunchbox smell funny. All of that, and all of the emotions associated with it, all of that gets packaged into what St. Thomas calls the phantasm. Now, I don't love that word, but I don't know what else to call it. Unfortunately, cogitative power makes you sound smart. Using the word phantasm just makes you sound weird. But regardless, a phantasm is like a 4D image. I mean, it's a fully fleshed out. It's not just the image on the TV screen. It's, again, all of the emotions and everything else with that. So once the cogitative power has done that, it passes the phantasm upstairs, if you will, if that's the project manager, it gives the report to the CEO of the company, to the higher faculties, the intellect and the will. So now you get to think about this image, this concept, and what it means to you, and reason through, all your options, and then make a decision. So that's what's that's what does happen. A key thing to understand in all of this is the way that emotions influence this whole process. So because the phantasm that the cogitative power is sending upstairs includes emotional data, when that emotion is really strong, it will impair the judgment. It will impair the free activity of the intellect and will. Another way to say this is strong emotions make us stupid. And we know this, right? This is not new information. But here you see it, you see why. The thing to know is that we need not be held hostage by those strong emotions, because our higher faculties are still autonomous and truly independent of our material bodies. They have the ability, we have the ability to reform the phantasm, to reform the image that's playing on that TV screen of our imagination. And when we do that, when we take control over our thoughts, over our mental images, it will change the emotion that is triggered by those images. And that will help settle things down. So the higher faculties can reform that image in the imagination, and this is the way the intellect and the will can still be in charge, can still be our higher faculties. That's the top-down right order that we're supposed to go with. Now, every time I talk about this type of stuff, give this type of presentation, there's usually at least one person in the room that gets upset. Because what they're hearing me say is, it's all about intellect and will, and emotions just need to be suppressed. And that's not true. That's not true. Emotion is incredibly important. Emotions are a crucial source of information. We need to listen to our emotions and understand the desires, the appetites underneath them. Because that's our heart. Our heart is where our desires live. But here's an interesting thing to know about the heart. It's not just it's not just the desires of the flesh. Our soul also has desires. And actually, St. Thomas tells us that the will is also an appetite. But it's the rational appetite. So we've got the sensitive appetites down here. This is where our bodies feel what is good. And up above, our will is responding to what the intellect knows to be good. The better formed we are up top, the more we reflect God's image, and our intellect is formed in the truth, our will is conformed with God's will up here, then the purer our desires are in that rational appetite, and we can start to purify those lower faculty desires as well, so that everything is integrated, lined up, and we maintain that top-down right order as we were created to. So that's the Catholic ideal. The world today, again, they don't understand this body-soul composite thing. They don't understand immaterial faculties, and there is no objective truth. Therefore, the highest good is what I feel to be good in my flesh. That's how the world sees things, but when the sensitive appetite is setting the agenda, it is an upside down ordering. It's backwards. It's not Catholic. So St. Thomas has a lot to say about the way that the body and soul is supposed to work together. Again, emotion is important, but it's not one of our highest faculties. One of the most helpful illustrations of this, analogies for this that I've ever seen, it comes from a psychologist by the name of Dr. Sue Bars, and she uses the image of a sailboat. So in this analogy, the intellect is the sailor. So the sailor sets the rudder and he adjusts the sails. And so the will is the rudder, and once that's set, that's gonna determine the direction the boat is gonna try to go. And then the emotions are the wind in the sails. So for the boat to move forward most easily, most rapidly, everything's gotta work together. The will and the emotions need to work together, so the more integrated our sensitive appetites and our rational appetites are, the more closely aligned our higher and lower faculties, then the smoother we're gonna sail. And a strong wind is just gonna make us go faster. But the intellect is still, has to choose the direction that we go in. And so if our intellect is well formed and free to think clearly, and everything's rightly ordered, then the intellect is gonna choose a virtuous course, right? But if any of one of those things is off, then you're not gonna maintain that course, or you're gonna choose a direction that maybe isn't so virtuous. So ask yourself, what makes a sailboat go off course, right? Well, one possibility is that the sailor doesn't really know what they're doing, so they're inexperienced. In other words, a poorly formed intellect. Another thing might be that the wind is actually so strong that it overpowers the sailor or the boat. So that would be strong emotions making it hard for us to think or to choose the good. Now, when I say strong emotion, what I'm really talking about in terms of it impairing our higher faculties, what I'm really talking about is raw emotion. St. Thomas calls this antecedent emotion or antecedent passions. So those passions, those emotions originate from the flesh, and they're sort of instant reflex knee-jerk emotions. They're kind of like raw sewage, if you think about it. There's a purified form of emotion. These are the ones we've had a chance to think about. And those are called consequent emotions. So these are emotions that that have been brought into line with reason. We've had a chance to think. We've had a chance to reform that image in our imagination, to bring it in line with reason. So they might still be powerful emotions, but they're not out of control. They're a chosen response. They're not a knee-jerk reaction. Very strong antecedent emotions, the lower faculty ones, are going to be associated, remember it's images that are triggering these, so they're going to be associated with vivid memories that have lots of detailed images in tow. So this is what happens when we're triggered, right? We hear that word all the time. Well, I've just been triggered. When you get triggered, it's because something has happened that has linked to bad stuff in your memory, and it's brought up all these bad images that produce, that trigger these very, very strong, raw antecedent emotions. And when that happens, St. Thomas says that those emotions pull all the operations of the soul in that direction. I want you to picture a big, beefy toddler yanking on your arm and just pulling you in the direction of the thing that he wants. That's what those strong antecedent emotions do to our higher faculties. The stronger they are, the harder it is to think. And again, this is, we know this is not new information. But what might be new is this understanding of exactly why it's happening. Thankfully, St. Thomas also has something to say about what to do about this, how to improve things. So going back to the sailboat analogy, how do you get better at sailing, especially in rough weather? Well, any sailor is going to get better with knowledge and practice, right? So it helps to strengthen our higher faculties, to form our intellect, and to build self-discipline in the will, learn how to delay gratification. And then that's great, but there's also a lot we can do down here in the body part, in those material faculties. So as a body-soul composite, anything that affects our material body is also going to affect our immaterial life. Think about being sick or in pain. It makes you feel grumpy and depressed, right? The physical body can really drag you down, but you can also make that work in reverse. So St. Thomas tells us that when we feel bad emotionally, when we're feeling really grumpy and depressed, we can do things that provide input to our external senses. And that gives new information to the common sense power, the memory, imagination. It ends up reforming the image in that direction. So spending time in nature, looking at beautiful art, listening to beautiful music, taking a warm bath, those are ways that we can use our physical body to lift our spirits, make us feel better. I should mention here that many psychiatric conditions, so things like clinical depression or anxiety disorders, bipolar disorders, schizophrenia, ADHD, whatever, those things are biologically determined illnesses that can and do respond to medication. So when a physical remedy like that, like medicine, is available for something, it is absolutely okay to use it. I mean, I know a lot of people of faith there's a lot of stigma around mental illness, and a lot of people have gotten the idea that, we're doing something against our Catholic or Christian faith if we're turning to, medicine for mental health disorders. And that's not true. St. Thomas would say it's fine if there's something biologically wrong, if there's a genetic or a biologically based mental health disorder and medicine has been discerned carefully and prescribed by a responsible physician, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using it. You're doing something responsible to stabilize your lower faculties and free the higher ones to be able to order things top down. It's medicine in that case it's a means to an end, it's a tool. Likewise, any kind of counseling, talk therapy, inner healing prayer, even fancy things like neurofeedback and EMDR, anything that helps us clean up this memory-emotion interface, process the painful things that have happened to us, and help us understand our experiences and heal our wounds, heal our painful memories. All of those things are going to help tremendously because they're going to clean up, they're going to purify the images that end up on that TV screen. And that's going to transform our emotions, which settles them down, it transforms them from antecedent to consequent, so that we're freed up again. Our higher faculties are free again to think clearly and make better choices. And I would call out just quickly some particular types of modern therapy that are actually quite Thomistic. They're very, very resonant with this information. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is one thing that really lines up well, as is something called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. I mean, there's lots of others, I'm not going to go through a whole list, but I'll just call out those two as being very, very resonant with what I'm talking about. Those two particularly do a lot to strengthen and equip those higher faculties, the intellect and will. And then all the other stuff that I could mention that helps in that memory emotion interface. I mentioned inner healing prayer. There's some information back there about the John Paul II Healing Center. Things like, certain forms of internal family systems, or what's called parts work, can be extremely helpful in improving things down here. So, in really healing some of those wounds. So, basically any therapy can be Thomistic as long as it respects this top-down order. So where you're going to get into trouble is where you get into a therapy situation where you're allowed to tell your story over and over and over again, kind of more for the purpose of getting sympathy from the therapist. You know, and hopefully we would know that wasn't helping us and maybe seek something else if that's where it was going. We do need to tell our story. We do need to tell our story for the purpose of understanding it with our reason, and so that we can forgive those who've hurt us and let go of pain and anger and accomplish that movement from antecedent to consequent emotion. Ideally, we want to purify our memories in light of Thanksgiving, because God is good and His will always and everywhere is our salvation. Hence, anything He permits to happen is for our good in some way. So when we get to the point where we can look back on painful things that have happened to us and have gratitude for the way that they helped us grow, the way they helped us mature, what we see in retrospect that God was accomplishing in that experience that He really couldn't have accomplished any other way, that changes the memory completely when we get to that point. And now the image in our imagination is not a dark one at all. It's one filled with gratitude. So that picture on the TV screen evokes completely different emotion. And that right order, that top-down order is restored. So it's important to acknowledge, though, that even when we do everything right, even when we get really, really good therapy, do all the work to reorder things and heal, there may still be pain and suffering, because there will be suffering in life that we cannot avoid. But what do we Catholics know about suffering? So, as Catholics, we know that we can offer it up because suffering has real value. And this is not something that the modern world understands. You know, for the world, suffering is bad and healing isn't complete until the pain is gone. Catholics see things differently. We see healing on a larger scale. It's about eternal life. It's not just about our earthly life. We understand that our suffering has value because it can be united to Jesus' suffering in the passion and offered for the salvation of the world. And we call that redemptive suffering. And that is a really big deal. So redemptive suffering is a profound good, and it is a privilege of our humanity. Redemptive suffering is the envy of the angels. Angels are intellect and will. They do not have physical bodies. They're not able to do this. Only the physical body can suffer in a way that redeems, that's redemptive, that has merit. That's why Christ became man, to suffer in the flesh. And we have the privilege, as long as we are alive, to suffer along with him and unite our teeny tiny sufferings to his totally sufficient one, or totally sufficient suffering. As soon as we die, we lose that connection to our physical body. And so whatever state of virtue we've reached at that moment, that's what we take with us into heaven or purgatory or hell. And that explains again why all human life is so incredibly sacred. Our physical existence is such an opportunity. And most of the time we don't realize it. But it is such a privilege. So again, I apologize for the massive drink out of a fire hose, and I've gone 2 minutes over. I do have some resources I want to point out, in particular on the back table. And I do have a handout that includes this image, as well as a couple of other notes of things that I've mentioned tonight. But let's see. So take-home points, real quick. There's an order to how our soul was created to function. Intellect and will are on top, and emotions are not, although they are still very important. And the picture in our head is what determines how we feel. That image on that TV screen of our imagination, super important. We talked about the difference between antecedent emotions that make it hard to think clearly and choose the good. We want to purify our emotions in light of Thanksgiving, which leads us to consequent emotion. And any treatment, medicine or therapy, that helps us in some way reorder things, it is going to be useful for Catholics. It doesn't have to be a Catholic therapist. It doesn't have to be a Catholic prescriber. Just anybody who's going to support this anthropology. And offer it up is not just an annoying cliche. Redemptive suffering is the envy of the angels. God bless you all. We're going to welcome Jody up here for the next talk, and I will start passing these out.